I opened it up and I was almost overwhelmed because it is the documentation that records my mother's coming over, having been brought over by the CEBF. It was like absolutely mind-blowing. The date when she came over, she always told me that she was quite late in Kindertransport, but she came over in the end in May 39. And the war started, of course, in September 39. So I hadn't realized the date that she'd come over, which was and how close it was to the start of the war. First of all, it details what she did when she got here and details her studies and first employment, which I hadn't known very, very much. And also a little interesting insight. They had given her theatre tickets, cinema tickets, and Hannah phoned to thank us for the cinema tickets. And that was quite touching because throughout her life, she was a lady who was very appreciative, always appreciative. It was a hallmark of hers that she didn't take life for granted, having been what she'd been through, and she never took anybody's favours for granted. And just have a little bit of insight as to how she lived and where she lived and how she moved around a little bit, and her first job was just, I felt suddenly connected to my mother as a young woman. And on the one hand, I felt her resilience that she'd seen those years through. On the other hand, I felt quite moved by her vulnerability. Yeah. And then she came over at the age of 14. The late Dr. Schonfeld, who was the remarkable hidden hero that was critical in her rescue as well. And when she came here and went to Shefford, was evacuated to Shefford. So he was absolutely instrumental in providing for the Jewish children in Shefford and instrumental in the rescue of many, many children, thousands of children. And she expressed constant gratitude to him and to Shefford, where she was evacuated as a child. Actually, my first overwhelming feeling was one of gratitude to the CBF who brought her over. And she had a number. When we think of numbers and the war, we think of numbers in Auschwitz, and we think of numbers of people's arms. This was a number of a young woman that they had rescued and given her a future. So my first feeling was, wow. On the 22nd of January 1946, and that's in the Jewish Chronicle of my mother's engagement. Wow. So essentially they kept in touch with her from 39 to 46, and they noted that, and is my mother's wedding photograph. She spoke about her experiences in the pre-war Germany. She spoke about coming to the shul. My post-Kristallnacht, and the shul was in flames. She spoke about the Gestapo coming to her house after her father had got a tip-off and run away. She remembers them waking her up in the middle of the night and asking her where her father was. She'd been told to say, my parents are divorced, my father's gone, I don't know. So she spoke about all of that. So she tells a very poignant story that when she after the war, she couldn't talk to her parents on the phone during the war, so they exchanged telegrams. And the first time she called her father over the phone, neither of them could speak. They were so overwhelmed. And they both put the phone down because they just couldn't speak. And then they had to call again to be able to have a conversation. And then when they were finally reunited, she came over from England to Switzerland, and she didn't know whether to wear makeup or not because she left as a 14-year-old. She arrived back as a 21, 22-year-old. So she didn't wear makeup the first day. And then the next morning, my grandfather had bought her all sorts of makeup-y things, about which I don't know too much, and put her in a bag. You're a young lady now. Wow. You're a young lady. So, the archive, as I said, to my mind, it's given us a framework for all these vignettes and anecdotes that we know, and helped us create the framework for putting all these vignettes together. And to me, that's been very powerful. She remained resilient throughout her years, remained deeply, deeply committed to her Jewish heritage. She tells a story post-war, how when sausages were no longer rationed, and a friend of hers said to her, Hannah, come on, let's have some sausages. And my mother said, yeah, but they're not kosher. And her friend was not as resilient as she was. Mm-hmm. But my mother said, no. These are the values. These are the values that I've been given. And I want, she said she always had a dream that one day she'd communicate these values to the next generation. So she had 5 children and lived to see children, grandchildren, and even a great granddaughter under the chuppah. First of all, we're living in a time with increasing anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and all that goes with that. And these are stories of indomitable spirits. They're stories of a remarkable organization that saved thousands of Jewish lives. And they're stories of spirited people who came here, dusted themselves down, and then rebuilt the community we have today. And I feel it is absolutely vital that we understand as much as we can of what they lived through and how they became the people that they became. Because ultimately, anything we have within the community today is built on their resilience, resourcefulness, determination, energy, and drive. And these files are a critical component in telling that story.